Hello, everybody. We're going to do just a quick introduction to Python in terms of vocabulary and where it started. Uh, the There are essentially, I guess you could call them two Pythons. The original Python was written in the language of C. So maybe I should write that language of C. So it is a scripting language that is made from another language, and that's not odd for scripting languages. But that means essentially that you have to use C in order to make it work. So there's a couple different versions out there of Python, not just in terms of how far they go, if they're 32 or 64-bit or whatever, but also what languages they're made in. And so there's a one called Jython, which is actually made in Java. In this class, we're going to focus mainly on Python, but if you use Jython, they have almost identical syntax. And by syntax, I mean wording and abbreviation. So if I say x is equal to 5, that means something. You could write that in Python or Jython where you're setting x as 5. And that is the syntax. So, there's, as we will learn in just the next statement, there's something called print, where you could say print and call it variable. I wouldn't necessarily call it that way. This is the print means it's going to print it to the screen, and variable is a variable you put in there. That's what I mean by syntax. It has to look like this. It has to have those parentheses. And like I said, Jython and Python look pretty close to each other. There's not a whole lot of difference. Sometimes I will associate syntax with kind of like a grammar. And we put periods at the end of our sentences, we indent our paragraphs, that sort of thing. Different programming languages have different set of rules for these sort of things. Python's, as you will find, is a lot more relaxed than a regular programming language. And so the question then becomes, well, what is Python a programming language? The answer is yes, it is, but it is more of what I would refer to as a scripting language. Now, there are various definitions for both, but I think this is probably the best way to put, not I'm sure the best way, but let's say the way we're going to use it in this class is that we have scripting and then we have programming. And you can think of programming or scripting languages. The scripting is usually going to be less explicit, whereas programming is going to be strongly typed. So in other words, if I use C++, I'm going to end every one of my lines, or almost every one of my lines, with a semicolon. That means strongly typed. That semicolon means something. It means that you've ended the line, go to the next line. In a scripting language, you don't have to say that. You don't have to put that semicolon at the end. Instead, what you just leave it blank. So you don't have to be, it's almost like you can drop the punctuation. So because that semicolon essentially acts like a period in English, it ends the sentence. So, well, what else is there to do? Well, in scripting, there is no compiling. Whereas in programming, there is. So now what does that mean? Compiling is taking typed code. So let's go up here. This is a line in programming. And this line has to actually be translated. Should I say translated? Has to be changed into machine language. So in other words, I'm using a Dell right now. I'm going to take this line, changes it into ones and zeros, such that my Dell computer can understand it, can understand that I want to print something out. When you don't compile, then you end up using what they refer to as an interpreter. And what does this mean? Well, um, because there's when you compile something, essentially you have a program, you compile it, and now it's ready to use. So if you've ever used the .exe file, these guys, you just double click and they work. Well, that's the reason why they work, is because everything's been done ahead of time. Scripting, on the other hand, waits till you actually want to run, and then it will go line by line. And so it'll take a line like print variable and then translate it into again your a local way of doing it. Now remember, technically we have compiled in a scripting because we use C. So C has compiled Python, which is essentially an executable, which now can go line by line and interpret one of your lines, like let's say print variable, and automatically change it into the desired result. Now, as the end user goes, actually, I don't think I'll add another one, but as the end user goes, it pretty much does the same thing. The big thing is that because of scripting, you never necessarily compile, but you do essentially push a play button, which makes it have to go. So they think that when you push this button, whether you build or compile, you'll run, because most build functions automatically run. But to a programmer, that it's going to be a little bit different. Now later on, we might have some reasons where we're actually limited in what we can do by using a scripting editor, and I'll try to point those out accordingly. Okay, so this is pretty much all I wanted to tackle in this video. The next video we will actually start working on some things in Python.